Item tonight, and that is a report on the City Financial Advisory or Community Financial Advisory Committee. So I've asked Andy Bell and Mark Robertson to join us tonight, along with other members who might be here. If you gentlemen don't mind joining us at the table, that would be great. As they're coming up, I'm just going to mention the members real quick. Pete Hackett, Andy Bell, Bill Brager, Dr. Dave Estrop, Teresa DeManna, Andy Barlow, Rodney Hickman, Mark Robertson, Bob Warren, Chris Wober, Dimitri Giannakopoulos, Charles Harris, James Bacon, Larry Ricketts, who's here tonight as well. Larry, thank you for coming. Elaine Doan, Charlene Roberge, Mary Beth Sheehan, Jason Barlow, Bill Freilich, Darren Cotter, and Steve Neely. So we spent, I'm sure you'll talk about this, several meetings with these fine individuals trying to kind of go over city finances and kind of come up with recommendations, ideas, and thoughts. And so if you don't mind, Commissioners, I'll turn it over. I imagine Andy will do most of the speaking as usual, and let them kind of go through some of the major findings of their report. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'll do is spend a little bit of time talking about the process we went through. I think it's important to know that and what we learned during the process, and then spend some time on the major recommendations we have. I think everyone's had a chance to read the report. I think it was given out to everyone a couple weeks ago. Does that sound all right to do that?
Fine.
So the CFAC, which is the City Financial Advisory Committee, was 21 individuals, which he just read the name of, selected by the city. I think we had a pretty good cross-section of the community. We had cross-section of gender and race. We had labor representatives, business, and education on the committee. I think we had pretty great participation and a lot of interest in this for the majority of people. As Jim said, we met 7 times, starting in January, about every 2 to 3 weeks, and then completing our work in April. The first 5 sessions were to review various topics. We talked about the purpose of the committee, city operations and finances. We did a detailed review of the budget for 2016, which I really enjoyed. I didn't realize how complicated the city government could be in terms of the revenues and expenses. Then we reviewed some specific divisions that represent 67% of the general fund expenses, the fire department, police department, and service department, and then had time for questions and answers. The last 2 meetings were spent developing our recommendations, and all members present voted on each idea that we presented, so we had good participation there. They also had 2 additional chances to take a look at preliminary reports and review and make comments on that before the final report was finalized. And so everyone had a pretty good chance for input into our recommendations. The city administration provided all requested information and really did not unduly influence us at all. In fact, they were not even present during the last 2 meetings when we did our recommendations. So they provided the information and really stayed out of our way to let us accomplish our task. It's also a note that we received only 2 dissenting votes on any of the recommendations, and that was on 1 recommendation. The 2 dissenting votes were regarding the increase in the income tax rate. Other than that, we had at least from my information, no one objected to any of them. So it's just on the income tax that we had 2 dissenting votes. During the course of our work, we came to realize how complex and challenging our city finances are. And let me hit a few of these that we came up with. There's been a reduction in support from the state for support to cities by reducing the local government funding and also the elimination of the state income tax. This has resulted in a decrease of several $1 million per year in our revenues, as all of you are quite aware, which has really forced the cities to look to the citizens of each community in Ohio for funding of their operations. The trade-off has been pay less to the state and potentially more to the cities. So we have a recommendation on that in a little bit. Another challenge is that 75% of our general fund revenue comes from city income tax, so there's not a lot of other sources of income. 78% of our general fund expenses are relatively fixed due to the minimum manning for police and fire, and also due to the state mandate that we fund the municipal courts. Use of the funds in various accounts are restricted and cannot be transferred. If you have a need for one fund, you can't transfer it to another fund other than using the general fund. Our income levels and property values are low compared to many other cities, which means that the same tax rate in Springfield develops more revenue than it does in other towns with higher income basis and property values. Then the final one is the state law dictates what income can be taxed. We have quite a few of our citizens that are not paying income taxes, or at least paying a lower amount of income taxes, which is kind of a surprise to me. With these challenges in mind, and based on the information reviewed, we developed our recommendations. But before doing that, Mark, I think you had some supplement.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I think the city's done some pretty yeoman work in controlling expenses, given the fact that the income has not increased greatly. One of the handouts we got early on was a listing from 2001 to 2015 of the expenditures and income that the city has gotten. Doing a little calculations, I think the inflation rate went up about 25% during that period. Our income went up 12.5%, and our expenditures only went up 9% or 9.5%. So you can see that if we were keeping up with inflation, you would expect greater revenue and greater expenditures, and I think the city's done a pretty good job of attempting to control expenses as much as possible, given the economic environment. I'm sure there's more efficiency to be gained somewhere, but I think the staff has done a pretty darn good job so far.
Okay. Solutions to these financial challenges are not easy. We certainly don't want to hinder economic development. We don't want to unduly tax our citizens. So we decided we really need to look at a couple areas, short-term fixes that could be quickly implemented for a short period of time to get us out of the situation we're in, and then longer-term solutions to provide the financial resources for our operations. Let me briefly review our major recommendations, and they're broken down into 5 categories: benchmarking, expense, revenue, operations, and other. But there's 3 that I think are of the most importance to our group. The first is the benchmarking performance audit. Our committee did not have the expertise or really the time to do a deep dive into all the finances and the operations. So we recommend and highly recommend hiring a professional firm that's very conversant on municipalities to do a benchmarking and performance audit at a minimum for the operations funded by the general fund, police, fire, and municipal court. This is really, as Mark said, not a reflection on the city administration. It's just, I think, good business practice for the future to do this. And I've read some reports from other cities, and it looks like there's some pretty good information in there. But we're not recommending the auditor of state do it, but an outside professional firm rather than that. Revenue enhancement, the first item there is one that's challenging, but I think it's needed. And our committee felt this, all but 2 people. Ask our voters for up to, and its key is up to. We're not saying that's the exact amount, but up to a 0.4% increase in our income tax rate for 5 years. This will get us over the short-term hurdle and develop about $6.6 million, which 5.1 would go in the general fund and 1.5, I guess, would go in the permanent improvement fund. This would be enough to offset our losses, pay for the shortfalls that are in the police and fire, what it's called the special revenue fund, return our street repair program to a more suitable level. You know, I think we're doing the best job we can, but it's sad to see our city streets, and it certainly doesn't make a very good impression on the people when they come to town, especially businesses. So that would be used for that, and also to build our reserves. A lot of people don't think you need reserves, but as we know, in times like this, you have to have reserves, and we need to rebuild those to keep our city on a sound basis. The recommendation, and this is a key point, ideally would be contingent on the city completing and implementing the performance audit. So have that done prior to asking the citizens for additional funds, and also allow the city to justify the rate increase of 0.4% or ask for less than that with potential of implementing some of these plans. I know timing is an issue here. I know that we'd like to get this on the ballot, but I think it's going to be awful tough to get this passed without having some good solid information and some good plans as to what we're going to do to reduce expenses. So that is a key point for our recommendations. We talked a little bit about the enterprise funds. From what we learned from that, they're pretty much self-sustaining by fees, and those can be controlled by fees, although Mark Beckel had said that we have some of the lowest fees for sewer and water and storm sewer of any municipalities around our area, so they're doing a good job there. We took a little bit of a look at the airport. It's losing money. If there's any way we could get that to break even, that'd be great. I'm not sure there is, but that was the only one that we had concern about on the enterprise funds. Municipal courts represent 6 or 11% of the general fund expenses. That's why we wanted them included in the performance review study, just to see if there's any chance of controlling some expenses there. I'm not saying there is, but just take a good hard look at that. The next category was expense reductions. We talked a lot about Reed Park Golf Course. That is a tremendous community asset, one that I've known ever since I was a kid. The problem is the usage by the citizens and the lower fees being charged doesn't cover the operations, as you well know. So our recommendation is that we no longer fund, and let it known in advance, no longer fund the golf course deficits after the 2017 season. Hate to do that because, again, it's a tremendous asset, but, you know, the public votes on that by their usage. Talk a little bit about the EMS services and the billing for that. Apparently, the insurance companies are billed and they're followed up on, but private citizens are not, so we think maybe take a little bit of a look at that because that directly funds the, I think, the fire special revenue fund. So take a look at that. Healthcare benefits, this may not be popular, but I think it's happening in a lot of businesses. Eliminate the spousal benefit for commissioners and for the employees where the spouse can get their coverage through their own employer. A lot of businesses are doing that, and I think you have to take a good business look at that. We also suggest a study of leasing versus purchasing of vehicles, especially. There's quite a few people on the committee, or several on the committee, that lease a lot of vehicles and think that leasing may be the way to go, but you may have done that, but that should be looked at. City Hall facilities, with the number of employees down from what was it, 730 down to 568 next year, or this year. There's some empty space up there. I think, Jim, you said maybe as much as the floor if you consolidate everything.
Potentially, sure.
So just to look at alternative uses for that, you maybe bring in other city departments if that's available, or to lease it out. I know you don't want to compete with private enterprise, but we also need to keep the city running. And then most importantly is to implement the recommendations of the performance audit. In terms of operations, the two key areas there that we felt that communications and marketing needed to be upgraded a little bit. The communication with the employees and with our citizens, I think, is not as good as it could be. In marketing, I think we have tremendous assets here that we need to continue to market to get for economic development. Also, if we're going to ask the citizens to vote on a tax increase, we need to have our ducks in order and have some good materials as to why that's needed and what we're doing to control expenses. Shared services, some of these are far out, I guess, but look at countywide shared services. I know the form of metropolitan form of government is tough, but we think we should look at shared services, nothing off the table. Law enforcement, fire, inspection and code enforcement, purchasing, maintenance, marketing, IT, economic development were areas we talked about. When it comes to the economic development, we especially think there needs to be greater cooperation between the city, the county, and CIC. That's been a problem for several years, and I think it needs to be addressed if we're going to have a good, solid economic development program. We talked about some long-term items. I'm not sure if they'll work, but I think we need to look at them. I mean, to me, it's ludicrous that the state tells the cities who they can tax and what can be taxed income-wise. And I think that should be looked at and try to lobby the state to see if we can get that changed. I think the cities are in a crisis and need to have help any way they can get it. And then the last thing is we request to have follow-up meetings in 3 or 4 months just to see how we're coming along on these and to offer any assistance that we have. So that was pretty much the report in a quick fashion. Do you have anything else to add on that?
No, you covered it all.
Andy, I have one question. When you were talking about golf courses, you said 2017. As I thought we were thinking about 2016 being the last year that the city subsidizes it.
Well, I'm not sure what you were thinking.
So did you folks mean that we would subsidize it next year also?
We thought in fairness to see if they can get their operations, find alternative uses for the golf course or someone else to run it or raise the fees and get more people to use it. To be fair, just say, give them that amount of time to get their ducks in order. I know it's been an issue all along, but we thought it'd be fair to go through 2017.
But the good thing, I think, is that there are plenty of other opportunities to play golf locally.
Well,
So it's not,
that's the bad thing, actually.
well, good or bad, I suppose, but you're not denying citizens the opportunity to play should
But if
that come to
we
fruition.
should decide to cost save on that this year, you wouldn't object. Is that fair?
I don't think we would, but
Well,
But-
I can't answer for it.
But we have a plan in place for that. That doesn't even, you know, that's going to be taken care of.
because that was
I
really
assure you.
discussed during our meetings about closing it down this year, and we were just trying to give some time to see if they could get it to work.
There was a lot of discussion about just that being a tremendous community amenity, and if there's ways to preserve it and save it and stuff, that would be nice. We didn't really get into the details of our recommendation because we're looking for information from them. We certainly talked about,
Something about 2016.
yeah, we certainly talked about 2016 and looking at different options, contracting it to someone else to run for next year, whatever might be.
Right.
It's just not fair for you to think that we haven't addressed that, because we have addressed it, and it will be addressed next year with regards to either a private entity or it being closed down. Because of what you said, there's plenty of opportunities to play golf. But we recognize, I think the entire commission, I'm not going to speak for them, but it is an amenity to have your own municipal golf course. You know, even if it's a private entity running it, it secures golf will always be in the community and not in just private hands. It's just an amenity we need to keep if we can.
Right.
But we agree it should not be a losing proposition. There's no reason for that.
I'm not even sure how many years it's lost money, but,
A lot. A lot.
I just have one question. Could you go over the up to, I think it was 0.4% for the 5-year, what you would recommend as a committee that money would cover and how much?
well, I'm not sure we can, other than what we had talked about, you know, we have a loss, what, 1.7 this year and last year and almost $1 million this year. So we certainly want to supplement that. You're transferring out of the general fund about $2.1 million to the police and fire special reserve funds. Our street repair program is not where it needs to be. And then to add money to the surplus were the 4 areas that we talked about.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
And I think we also talked about just public safety and crime and things of that nature. But Commissioner, they really weren't suggesting how we spend the money per se, although there was discussion surrounding that. That's all being framed by the community surveys that we're doing, the phone surveys, and seeing what people are actually interested in. So that's something that, you know, frankly, during the month of June, we will have that drilled down to what the citizens are interested in, and then we'll be able to kind of frame around that. We just came up with an amount that would get us kind of back to where we are with being able to supplement the reserves and take care of two big problems we know of at a minimum, which are crime issues and roads.
Okay, I guess I just want our citizens to understand that we were talking about 5 years and knowing what we're talking about and what the committee had come up with. So thank you.
Well, we thought it should be a 5-year period, not extended beyond that. If we needed to go back in 5 years for another one, if we have to.
To renew it or something, yeah.
I had a couple questions. First, with the recommendation about doing a benchmark study and performance audit, I thought you said perhaps somebody outside of the auditor's office, which I think does that service. Is there certain, not asking necessarily for a recommendation, but as part of your recommendation on doing that, is there places we can look to find that service, or the staff can be aware of to?
There are, and don't ask me because I don't know.
But the staff is aware of them already.
And Larry Weeks, who used to do the city audit, was going to be involved in the process, or would suggested get involved in the process, so he's very familiar with those types of firms.
Okay. As far as looking at the potential revenue enhancement, I think you realize the same thing we realize, that we're heavily dependent on income tax. Was there any discussion in the committee about property tax or other forms of potential revenue enhancement?
Yeah, I think there was. But the declining property values, we thought that perhaps would be an inappropriate way to go, at least at this point. I know other cities in Ohio have higher rates of millages, but I think we just decided it would probably be simpler, at least at this point, to do so. I think it's a good idea if we can do it to broaden the base of those who are actually paying the taxes and supporting the city.
But at least one thought was that because that is maybe subject to more volatility, that maybe that might be not as good to rely on.
That was one of the concerns.
Talking about property values.
Yeah.
Yeah.